1997, I had an NDE with heart and brain damage, and had memory and processing functions in the bottom 5 percentile. And I was told after a number of months of neurological testing that I'd never work again. Well, not that I would never work again, but my brain would never be different, because adult brains don't heal. And here I am. But I'm going to use that for my excuse if I get muddled up here. In trying to remember my speech, I still can't do that. I have no clue what I've written on my outline. What I want to do tonight is really build on both the talks and the earlier talks and challenge each one of us to take this home into a practice and provide a way to do that practice. The NDE is a rarefied event. You know, this is a crowd that you have about a third of the people that will raise their hand and say, yes, I've had one. But for the others that haven't had one, it's like daddy trying to tell a little child what sex is like. You know, you can give them all the books, all the information, but it ain't quite the experience. What I want to do is to look at 2 other gateways to these types of experiences. The NDE and the NDE research has been critical and very important because it's a very specific phenomena, and it has been well researched to show us that it is a doorway to higher levels of experience if we're open to the data. What I've seen over the years is there's a number of other doorways, and they're increasing rapidly. I happen to be married to a woman who sees auras around everybody. And in the 1980s, she said, you know, people's auras are changing. And she told me about an indigo color that she had seen in a few of her friends. And they were very creative individuals, and she brought it up because one of them was institutionalized. He was very creative, but he couldn't land his body in the world in 3D and function. And then a few years later, she says, you know, I'm seeing that color in little babies. Now, what's clear today is that the data is there if we're willing to look regarding non-local consciousness, ESP, however we want to call it. But there wasn't any data on how it's going to be changing. So I did some research, and I just want to mention it briefly here. It might be something we can build on or play with some of the other people. But it was retrospective, looking at people at all ages and asking them, have you had any kind of not NDE, but psychic events? Have you ever looked up suddenly and seen someone staring at you? Or have you ever thought of someone before they just, right before they telephoned you or something other kind of happened? Coincidences. To guides, to very heavy-duty spiritual things. What was interesting is that up to about 6 or 7 before the egoic structure kind of consolidates, most people had it at all ages. And then for, well, about everybody in this room, the age group, at about 6 or 7, it went to 0. And then about 25 years ago, it started creeping up again. And it's escalating in a progressively increasing curve. But what's interesting is if you use the same survey for kids under 30, 25, somewhere around in that area, you see that same bump up to 6 or 7, but it doesn't go to 0. They've maintained these capabilities, and those are also increasing very rapidly. There's another doorway, and I guess I mentioned this survey because the veils are lifting, they're thinning. To have this level of a conversation was pretty rare a decade ago. I've worked in rehabilitation for the last, since the early 1980s, off and on, given some of my own vacations from work for disability. And there was a very dramatic, at about the year 2000, change in how people started perceiving themselves. They don't see themselves as psychic at all, but they hold themselves differently in relationship to who they are. There's another area, though, another doorway to higher consciousness that I do want to talk to in a little more detail tonight, and that is trauma, crisis. When we raised our hands before, about a third of the people, poked their hands up when they said, do you have an NDE? But I'd ask you, has anybody had periods of confusion or been in crisis themselves or feeling lost in their lives? How many people have had that experience? Yeah, that's kind of ubiquitous. It's all of us. Well, folks, that is a doorway to higher consciousness if we face it directly. We have a culture that is averse to crisis. All of our helping institutions are set up to get us back to normal, to eliminate the symptoms, eliminate the problems, or at least give us some semblance of normalcy that we can operate again and function like we knew we used to. Well, I was curious about people that never got back to normal. In the 1980s, I started interviewing people with the worst of the worst crises. And I did it not for this kind of a talk, I did it to help my clients see that choice still existed with people that were far worse challenged than they were. Because the very common stance that people would take was that, I want to get back to work. I want to get into life again, but you guys don't understand. I got this problem. And the problem confined their ability to choose. They were trapped within it. Well, one of the things I started finding when I interviewed, now this is a very small subgroup, much like NDEers. It's the 5% that researchers throw out and say, well, there's not enough significance there. But if you look at the people in that 5%, people who are dying, people who have broken necks and will never walk again, but they're engaged in life, they're happy, and they're full of life. If you sit this cohort down together, or individually, it'd be better, and ask them, what happened? What you see is a very, very clear pattern, and that's what I want to start talking to you about tonight. There's 3 phases that we can break it up into. Crisis is the first one, we all know that one. We slug through it, sometimes we're scarred for life by it. We all know what PTSD, people limping along with severe crises that is embodied, that we have no volition about our reactions to it even. But how many people have actually heard about PTG, post-traumatic growth? Anybody? One, my wife.
Not here.
That was well identified, researched in the 1990s. And I think it's a reflection of our cultural mindset that we do not know anything about PTG. It's also a reflection about our beliefs about what consciousness is. The PT researchers themselves were puzzled by one of the findings, and that was that people with the worst crises, the people that their lives fractured completely, grew the most. Paradoxical. They had the least to work with, and yet they grew the most. We have no models to make sense of that. Well, if we start interviewing people that have gone through this process, we see 3 elements. At some point, the people who do grow through crisis let go of the reality they know. And often, in retrospect, as I look back through the people I've interviewed, it was after the helping systems gave up. It was after the helping systems, the doctor comes and says, we've exhausted everything we know how to do. You have maybe 6 months to live, and there's nothing we can do to save you. Goodbye. We can give you palliative care, we'll do the best we know how, but goodbye. So people were left hanging, and all of a sudden that last little cord got cut, and they're very free-falling. I'm dying, and there's nothing I can do about it. Well, a few people let go fully and said, I get it, I'm dying. Well, I've got a broken neck, and there isn't anything going to happen here. No one's going to fix this. I get it. This is who I am being. And from that stance, they see the world in an entirely different way. And new questions start popping up, like, I'm alive today. What do I want to do before I die? And that's a very different question than, what do I need to do to fix myself so I can get back to life? It is a place of, here is what's present, here's what's true. Here's a seed that I'm placing in a desire that I want to take action on, and I take action. I take a step towards it. I roll my wheelchair towards it. I use my voice. One woman that I talked to in the late 80s had Lou Gehrig's disease, was given 2 years to live, and she knew she was dying. She accepted it and wanted the best death ever. She was an overachiever and perfectionist and wanted to die the best. As she lived her life, she had to be the top and the best, and she was in everything that she did. And as she started thinking about it, well, the best means, to really love myself and love life. And I can't do either. But I have no clue what that means. So she set out to discover what love was before she died. She had a wheelchair. She was a bowl full of jello in a wheelchair. And she set out to take action from a place of ability and desire. I talked to her last week. She's walking, talking, fully reversed Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. Now, one of the kickers here is that this particular woman was a hospital administrator, and in her perfectionism was on her way up the corporate ladder to be the youngest vice president of a hospital, which was derailed by the illness. She came back into the health field to talk about her experiences. She did research at the University of Washington on Lou Gehrig's, and particularly sought out those patients that stabilized and some did reverse, and looked at what are the factors common to that group. And then she lectured, worked widely in the field until about 2000, and I lost track of her. And I thought she had died. But when I refound her a few months ago, I discovered that, and asked her why I hadn't heard anything in literature from her since then. She said, I got to the point where I recognized that the message I was trying to give was not being heard. I talked about a way of being, a state of mind. And we talk about, it's a reinforcement of what's already been said here. She chose her state of being. And the world came in around that and supported it. What the medical field wanted to do with that, though, is say, what did you do to heal Lou Gehrig's disease so we can turn around and fix others? What I found universally in this group is that they let go of needing to be any different than they already are and started creating what they wanted from their heart, what they wanted. They became whole, they became able, they became engaged in life, and they didn't need to be fixed. One of the side effects of that was they forgot to die. And I can't couch it any other way, because they didn't do all this to heal. And in fact, some of the people died. I followed a physicist 15 years after he had MS and was given a year to live. And never got out of the wheelchair in the years that I knew of. And I asked him a question, and by that time I had asked enough people the question that I knew what he'd say, or at least partly what he'd say. I asked him, well, what was that MS to you? I mean, you had a company of 70 people. You're a contractor to NASA. It's an aerospace company. He has 15 patents to his name, part of the MRI he's patented. You had a bachelor's degree when he was 18 years old. I mean, brilliant man. And this ruined it all. I said, you can't even have sex. What is this MS to you? And he looked me right in the eye without hesitation and said, that was the best goddamn thing that had ever happened to me. Now, it took me many years to really hear some of the more subtle pieces here. One of which was, if someone could come and bring a magic bullet and fix me and get me out of this chair and get me to the point I can make love to my wife, and I lost what I've gained, I wouldn't do it. Think about that. Think about in our own lives, all the things we're struggling to keep together. You know, the mortgage, the marriage, whatever. And he's saying, if it all goes away, that's not who I am. That's not who we are. One NDEer, if anybody knows Bill English, Salt Lake IANS. He's been in a wheelchair, broken spine for years. We talked to him last spring when we were there, and so I was seeking him out too, because he's been going through more treatment, and the kind of treatment, that hyperbaric or some sort of a treatment they're doing with him that is now creating blindness. So on top of all the other stuff, he can't see, he can't travel, he can't come to a place like this. And with an incredible equanimity and peace in his voice, he says, you know, this is my vehicle. This isn't who I am. This isn't who I am. What I'd like to do is create a bit of a perspective here, and then see if we can bring it into practice. And that makes me have to deal with technology here. That wasn't it. There we go. And I realized when I put that on, I just missed a story, so I'll tell the story first. In 1997, I share a very small bit of the NDE that I had because I think it's instructive for perspective. You don't have to believe it, it's there as a metaphor. It was a very extensive NDE, and I'll share just a little piece here that's pertinent. As I found myself suspended. I still had presence in my body, but I felt suspended in nothing. I couldn't tell what was around me. I had no perspective, no contrast, and the mind cannot operate without contrast. And finally, as I was really kind of lost and floating, like, what do you do? How do where do you go? I'm just kind of suspended here. I saw this light coalesce in front of me. And I knew the light was infinite. And yet it had a finite form. And as I began to start approaching it, I recognized that it took a finite form for my own behalf. That I could not perceive it otherwise. The mind can only operate with contrast. And as I began to approach this, long story short, I spent a lot of time on the edge of it. And I would meld into this infinite light, knowing that it contained everything, all dimensions, everything. Pure unity, pure love, like in most NDEers, no language. I knew that I could not understand this in my cognitive self when I came back, that I would lose 90% of what I was experiencing. But as I merged towards this and into it, I began to dissolve into the field as well. And it scared me, obviously, because I started disappearing into it. So I would draw, feel my body again, draw back into the light, and withdraw, re-enter the light. And I got to the point where I almost dissolved. It was like I had no sense of body left except just my mind. And I recognized that if I dissolved or just let go fully to the light, that who Jim was would disappear. That I would have no ability to choose. And that is our power to create. It was my choice that directed the whole scene there. But what was fascinating was that if I fully merged with the light, I would have lost that capacity for choice, at least at the level of consciousness that I know. And to merge fully into the infinite would become infinite. That is the reality. The light is fundamental reality. It is us. We're playing the illusion. The only possible way that I can communicate with you is to create the illusion of separation. But what we've done is buy the illusion that now this becomes real. So in crisis, what I see people letting go to is very similar to the NDE states. As they let the structures break up, they naturally expand to a larger aspect of themselves. That becomes their identity. They still honor the individual. Here's who I am. Here I am in the physical. But I'm much more than this. And there's a natural engagement to help others, serve others, because I'm part of the planet. I want to go help. That's the primary impulse that comes out, and it's so exciting to watch some of these people. One guy was going to start a foundation. You know, he had no resources, but he said, God, I want to do this. This is so cool. It cracked open the box of the reality that we experience. So this is a real slide here. This is who we are. Pure, unbounded presence. And in that presence, if I can create something, we have an experience. And each one of our experiences is very unique. And with each experience, the human being has the capacity to then take it and conceptualize it. And we conceptualize that to blue, unless you're colorblind. And then you don't see blue, you just see gray or something. But we codify the world and create a box out of that. Around any experience and any thought we have, or any belief, any concept, we have the capacity to be aware. With awareness, we have choice of how we interact with this phenomenal world. From awareness, we're outside of time and space. We're into what both these folks were talking about and trying to reach for conceptually. And all we can do is point. Who we are is the field of awareness in form. And it doesn't take crisis for us to let go. People on a spiritual path, people are meditating, people are consciously stepping aside the mind's container and saying, I'm more than this. Wow, I can play with this now. This is something, the tool that I have. But what's happened in our modern world is we know about the postmodern world. I call it the post-experiential world. We've grown and made it into a box. And just look at the level of dialogue in our culture right now. It's all about whose box is right. And any box, any concept is a fragment. Black is only black with white. It's all reflected by what it's not. It's not truth. Science and religion, all the constructs of either one are in that box, and that's what we're fighting over. Both point in different ways to these experiences. Now, I didn't say that the slide before, you see the outer edge of that kind of feathered away. Well, we've got our 3D and 4D experiences, and then we've got the experience of love. We have spiritual unity. We have these more subtle, ephemeral experiences that are more unified. They're less egoic, less structured. And those experiences, you can continue to feather that off until infinity. So how do we start acting with all of this? Crisis that I see, and I'm running out of time, aren't I? Okay. The power of crisis to transform. So when we're stuck, when we have a problem, we can see the structure of the problem itself as an opportunity to step aside that structure and restructure something else. When we're caught within the structure, then it dictates to us what our options are. And that goes with anything that we perform in the world. It goes with our own health. So let's look at this field in a little more dynamic way. This is what Jim Macartney sees 24/7 around people. if you think you're an individual entity, you look at the aura there, the energy field that emanates from each one of us, it fills the room, each one of us do. And if you think you act separately from anybody else, think again. Now, that's me. I want to make sure that we have both sexes here. Each one of us is very unique. And two short little stories here. One is when she was in college and first started seeing that she had no clue what they were. And was scared daylight. So because the only thing she was a psychology major, and the only thing in psychology is say that she's psychotic. So she went highly functioning, yes. So she went to a physics professor, which is the guy to go to, I find these days. And he got a buddy in his in the teaching hospital there at the university to do an experiment. And they took 30 patients, switched them all around the hospital, put them in beds with no markings on them, marched around and said, "What do you see?" And she diagnosed 29 out of 30 correctly. Scared her to death, I hear. One interesting little vignette was about 4 months later, they came back and said, "Oops, we misdiagnosed the 30th. But I tell that story in part because what happened after that? Absolutely nothing. Look at the window here to an opportunity to look at consciousness, look at humans in a new way, and it just gets shut down. And I can tell you time after time after time when people have come to me with transformational experiences, and they'll say, "You know, the doctor was scared shitless. They don't want to even deal with me anymore." Or they don't understand it, they just say goodbye. Or they said, "Oh, you know what, that's a misdiagnosis, goodbye." I've had that happen to